There we go.
Great.
Welcome to Quarkus Insights episode 131. And we got special guests. Gavin.
There we go.
Great.
I got a massive echo.
Fixed.
What? Sorry.
A little bit of chaos to start us off.
See? It's not just me. We're just making fun that we were in good time and everything's fine. So, okay. Anyway, we're here for the episodes, Quarkus Insights. Before we get into the meat of it, which is about Hibernate 6 and Quarkus 3, I just wanted to shout out to the GraalVM that did a version GraalVM 23.0 yesterday with Quarkus 3.2, which is being built. We pushed the release of that 1 week to pick that up, because this is the first version where GraalVM will align with the OpenJDK release schedule. So for all practical senses, it became the version that makes sense to do. So we have Java 17 support and later Java 21. But yeah, that came out yesterday. And we'll trying to get the GraalVM guys on board on some episode in the future to talk about all the implications and stuff. But basically, it's out now, and you can try it. And we'll have a Quarkus 3.2 next week. They will have a Mandrill version that uses the GraalVM there. So anyway, that was just a quick update on that one. So anyway, let's go quick to Gavin and Steve. So Steve, you haven't been on before. Who are you and why are you here?
Well, I am the lead of the Hibernate ORM project, so doing a lot of the work on it over the last, I guess, 20 years now, give or take.
Oh yeah,
that's about it.
That's about it. And Hibernate 6 is the version I think you started working on when we started working together like 20 years ago with all the AST changes.
It feels like it, yeah. It's taken
Will do. Okay. Gavin, you want to? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, well, I wanted Steve to tell us a little bit about how Hibernate 6 was conceived and how the work on that started, because I wasn't there.
I thought we were going to get into that with the discussion, but yeah, I can get into that. It actually goes back to one of the older JSpec runs, and working with our performance team. One of the things, or SpecJ, sorry. One of the things that kept coming up over and over again was reading result sets by column names being like one of the big bottlenecks for performance. So a lot of it actually kind of grew out of that. Turns out, if you think about a corollary, it's reading from an array versus reading from a map. It turns out if you change from reading from a map to reading from an array, there's a lot of changes involved. So, kind of spiraled from there. We, made a bunch of changes, but we also did take the opportunity, to improve the API quite a bit, and we'll get into that during the discussion.
Yeah.
I guess we've got sort of two questions that follow on from that. One is I want to hear more about the performance numbers, but probably before we do that, we should go on to who are you, Gavin, and why weren't you there?
Yeah. So I'm trying to remember how long ago it was that I started working on Hibernate. I don't know, probably pushing on, it was certainly 20 years at least, more than that. And the funny thing was that after getting JPA done and getting EJB3 done, I kind of moved on to work on some other different things, on CDI, which kind of like was a attempt to kind of redefine the core component model of Java EE as it existed at the time. And then kind of during that time, like there was a big fashion. There was for some time there for kind of dynamic languages and NoSQL databases, and people started talking about schemaless persistence and how that was somehow going to make their life easier. I think that was quite I don't think that was very well thought through. Not having types doesn't make your life easier. As a developer, it makes it much harder. So I kind of, in sort of rebellion against that fashion, I went completely the opposite direction and started thinking about how to, how we could get a better power to weight ratio out of Java's type system, and that led to working on Salon, and I worked on that for like 10 years actually on the Salon project, thinking just all the time about type safety and about type systems, and working on building the compiler and all that. Well, so that project got some some nice community, but ultimately wasn't successful. So I was casting around for something new to do, and got involved in Quarkus, and one of the first things I did was kind of to realize, well, what are we going to do with Quarkus with respect to persistence, and the question is, are we still, is Hibernate, is that still going to be Hibernate? Is it still going to be JPA? What are we doing here? And I did some research. I went on Stack Overflow, and Stack Overflow published a lot of data in a kind of a BigQuery database on I forget what was that, Google or something. I forget what site it was. And so I did some analytics on that, and it turned out that that in terms of questions being asked on Stack Overflow and everything, like Hibernate was still extremely widely used. It was like, I don't know, 4 years ago. So, and also asking around our colleagues and stuff, it seemed like our solution for persistence for Quarkus was still going to be, this was still going to be a core option that users would have, and probably the thing that was very important. And you can even see that in other communities, people using Spring, Micronaut, it's still the live thing, right? So we started talking about how we what we should do. Steph had some idea with Panache, and we had I remember a discussion we had about, well, how are we doing querying? How can we make is it this string? Is this embedded query language like we used to use in JPA? Or is it going to be something else? And kind of I got sucked in, and then we were talking about a reactive, and how we were going to integrate Hibernate into a kind of a reactive programming model on Quarkus, and so that led to a Hibernate reactive. So I kind of got sucked back in from that perspective of I was working on Query Validator on Hibernate reactive, and that kind of brought me back into contact with the work that was going on in Hibernate ORM. And I got excited to see that, Steve and Christian and other guys there were in the process of completely rebuilding the query parser and the query translator, and that and I realized that in some sense that's the core thing that needed to be done to really be able to reinvent Hibernate and really bring it to into a new world, right? To really be able to I mean, we'll get in later into all the advantages that has, but and so then, well, I'll leave it there. But that's how I got back involved in this effort, and that was like 3 years ago now, and since then.
I always like what they say about schemaless persistence, which is you still have a schema, you just haven't written it down, so you don't know what it is.
Right. Yeah.
But it will hit you.
Yeah. It will, and it just makes my migration and maintenance chaotic rather than something you can have control
over. So Steve, coming back to I know the thing about accessing by results set by strings and arrays. I think we had an episode about performance at Hibernate, I don't know, half a year ago or something. Feels like a long time ago. And he mentioned this thing, and he said the funny thing is, Hibernate has been it's fast in itself, and the fact that this is going to be the big issue that may make a big difference was, well, not a surprise, but it's basically you were left, the only way we could make Hibernate faster yet was to go do this refactoring. And yeah, that's it's a fun thing that's what matters. But beyond that, Hibernate 6 is probably if you look at API, there's a bunch of stuff that changed, like criteria API has changed. Can you kind of, what else has done besides changing the internal structure on Hibernate 6?
Well, we have an entire list of things to go through that have changed, but yeah, I mean, at a high level, we took the opportunity to clean up some of the APIs that had lingered around for the last 20 plus years, with a number of different focuses. we tried to do a little bit better in terms of what we call identifying supported APIs, right? So things that, oh, if you're using this particular interface and you have a bug or something goes the way that, differently than what you expect, okay, we consider that a supported API, or we don't consider it a supported API. So we have a very, specific list now of what that is. So, it gave us the opportunity to do that. Gave us the opportunity to modernize some of the APIs. We'll see type safety. Gavin talked about type safety already. Giving type parameters to a lot of contracts that maybe didn't have them before. So, for example, a query, the query contract, now has type parameters for whatever whatever types you're returning. Some things like that. Mapping APIs, mapping annotations and the XML gave us an opportunity to kind of relook at some of that in terms of, the annotations really kind of grew out of the XML and really was just XML done in annotation. So it kind of gave us, the ability to change that up in terms of, okay, well, I personally really like the whole idea of composition of the annotations. I think that's, generally pretty good, pretty good best case use case. So, for example, if I want to tweak, the actual JDBC side of this, well, there's specific annotations that you do for tweaking just that particular thing. But you might not have to, write like a full-blown, custom type, for example. So it just lets you, tweak the individual pieces that you need changed. Yeah, I mean, it goes on and on. There's a lot of different things that we changed.
So basically, what I'm hearing is, from an end user, they'll have to write less. Like when you access the API, they have to do less typecast and stuff because it's just part of parameters.
Yeah, it's even more than that. I mean, there's a lot of times, and especially in terms of like mapping and things like that, there's a lot of times where, previously you would have to write a custom type and plug it in, where you don't really have to do that in a lot of cases now. So it actually reduces the code that you maintain, which is nice from that perspective.
Okay, so on a given property or column, I can specify just attribute. Yeah, I can just specify the conversion rules and then not have to have a specific type for it, or something like that. Yeah,
more or less, right? Yeah.
More.
Like if I want to map a string to like some oddball database type, right? I can, in most cases, just tweak the, well, this is what the oddball database aspect looks like, and Hibernate can figure it out in a lot of cases.
So like I think it's important to say that, like, I mean, to me, what I identified as, really the source of a lot of problems that people have with working with ORM technology is the error reporting, right? When they do something wrong, how do they know what they did wrong? And you have two ways of fighting against that, okay? You have type safety and you have good error messages. And those are your only real two ways of, communicating with your users. Obviously, the best one is type safety. If you can catch their error at compile time, that is like 1,000 times better than if they find their error when the session factory starts up, or when they run a query. So I would say, or in production, So I would say, the critical thing here is there is a much greater emphasis in Hibernate 6. We are making much greater use of these two tools to try and get better feedback to the user. And I think that this is something that, historically we've done badly because of how where Hibernate came from, how it started, how, the fact that when, I started the project, I didn't know shit about shit. I had like 2 years experience as a professional software developer. And so, and if you look around at the world at the time, I mean, the technologies we were working with, like, IBM WebSphere and JSPs and the technologies I was used to using, and most of the things in the Java ecosystem at the time didn't do good error reporting, and had been developed by people who were not Java programmers and didn't know how to take full advantage of the Java language. And I think it took us time, it took us years to learn how to write libraries in Java. And I don't think we finished, and I don't think we, I think even today, I feel like that's something that is not as appreciated as it should be. So we've got a lot better for sure. Much better than when I started coding Java. But Hibernate is an old project. It's an old technology there, and what's interesting about this, project is that it's a real challenge to take something which is an old project, right, which has a lot of old code in it, and bring it into the new world, like bring everything we know today about how to build libraries written in Java and apply it to something that was designed many years ago, and at the same time do that in a way that doesn't just absolutely cause chaos for existing users. And so this is a very hard project. People kind of shit on maintenance programming like it's something that's unimportant. Maintenance programming is, to me, the center of programming. You're a good developer if you can maintain software, because that's the hardest kind of programming, right? And if you know how to maintain and evolve software with lots of existing users, right? That is, that to me is the biggest challenge, right? Anybody can, create a new system with everything we know today. It's bringing knowledge that you've learned back and adapting and evolving software that's really hard in my view. So, yeah.
I'll jump in here too, just to the Wayback Machine. I was thinking about it as you were talking about it. Like Oracle 8 was just released. SQL Server 2000, I think, was just released. Just the old technology that we were having to deal with. And, even if you think about, being able to modernize the SQL concepts that we use, for the databases that actually support some of that stuff. I mean, yeah, there's a lot involved in terms of, moving technologies underneath the covers there.
Yeah. So one of the other things we haven't mentioned so far that is different in Hibernate 6 is that we're really now taking advantage of the evolution of SQL of relational databases since the early 90s. Hibernate originally was designed as kind of a, and the query language in particular was designed as kind of a lowest common denominator of late 90s, I think. SQL, Sorry. Yeah. Sorry. Early 90s. Yeah. There was a lot of things we couldn't do. There was a lot of features which we simply couldn't take advantage of. And I think one of the wonderful things that's come out of this is that by two things. By finally recognizing that, hey, there's a whole lot more that's now available and that's now widely supported. And by a second thing, which was to say, okay, we're going to focus on certain platforms, okay? We're going to say, fine, the existing dialects, the existing support we have for several other databases will continue to exist, and it'll be community maintained in a separate module. But in the core of Hibernate, we'll have support for these. How many platforms are they, Steve? I don't know a number.
I don't know, 8, I think.
6, 8, something like that. Yeah. Probably more, but because these are the ones which we can really come up with a set of features which are going to be thoroughly portable across all these platforms, and that means that we'll be able to have the query language and the functionality of Hibernate be much more portable between databases, and that's a real We've always de-emphasized the idea that the reason to use ORM was to obtain portability between relational database systems. Now, but that was also a lost opportunity, right? Like, it was a lost opportunity, particularly because it made Hibernate harder to use. Or harder to learn and harder to document. If you needed a different set of SQL functions, functions for every database you were working with, you have to go, digging between lots of sources. So by making things more portable, we also make it more easy to document and more easy to learn, especially the query language. And on top of that, the other thing we've been able to do is extend the functionality of Hibernate of the query language into more analytics oriented queries where we simply never went before. So this, adopting, I don't know what the right word for it is, modern SQL or something like that, right? Like, 2020 SQL is a really big deal, I think. It really changes the story of what you can do with Hibernate.
When you say analytics, do you mean sort of going towards big data?
Do I mean that?
Like windowing functions,
Yeah.
things that you would typically use to generate, roll-up reports or whatever it happened to be.
Yeah. Like audit set aggregate functions, window functions, roll-up cube, all this kind of stuff that you use for reporting.
But also stuff like coordinates and maps, like higher order types, right? Like there's more power on date queries and distance.
Well, there is Hibernate Spatial, which kind of fills that niche, which is it's totally focused on spatial aspects, shapes, coordinates, all that sort of stuff you just mentioned, and actually ties it in with the query language, so you're able to to use coordinate based stuff in your HQL, in your criteria queries, so on and so forth.
Yeah, so I actually only for the first time ever played with spatial like a couple of weeks ago, and it's actually very cool. It's very nice. But the other thing where you're talking about dates and times, Max, is another thing is that we've put a lot of work into the portability of the behavior of dates and times across Hibernate, and particularly into there's a whole sub-language for dealing with arithmetic of dates and times and durations and all this kind of stuff. So there's a lot of stuff rolled into the query language, which was never there before, and it's all portable and it's all documented, and that's a huge.
It's all type safe, and the whole thing. Yeah. We check it very, very rigorously. So it's really much nicer.
And I guess another thing, and this is a lot of the internals, right? That everything is now clear, separated. So the public APIs, private APIs, is that all just internal, or is it something that affects users too? Or is that just?
I think there's different parts there. I mean, the things we've been discussing so far really affect users. We'll let them take a little bit better, let them leverage better let them leverage some of the HQL functions, or some of the new behaviors to do that. So that stuff definitely is, or the mapping annotations. That stuff's definitely very user focused, or usage focused. But there's tons of internal changes as well. One of the big ones that you talked about was, I mentioned it in the beginning, recognizing what is a supported API. And part of that is the distinction between what we call an API versus an SPI, which is something that, a container might, API is specific to what a container might use to integrate with ORM. As well as internal. And we've actually, started adding additional ones like incubating. We took this from Gradle. They've got this great notion of incubating. So you can annotate something as incubating, and it's just a heads up to people that might be using that, hey, this is new. It's like tech preview, I guess, if you will. It's new. We expect it to change. We are expecting it to be exposed, but just realize it might change in the near future. So there's a few categorizations that we do there that just help people understand what's supported, how it's supported, what's not supported. I mean, that's useful information.
And so this is very important, right? Like I can't overestimate how important it is. Tradition, because of where Hibernate came, like initially we just simply didn't. It simply wasn't very well communicated which bits of Hibernate were considered to be APIs, which bits were considered for use by integrators and framework developers only, which bits were completely internal. And so what actually happened was that people would, had no warning that they were writing code against things which were considered internal implementation. And especially, we sell support for this product, right? And if you don't, and so what actually happened was that in previous versions of Hibernate, there was a I think we kind of got into this cycle where everything was being treated as an API that with strong requirements of backward compatibility, and I think that forced, I talk about this idea of being able to evolve, old software. If you have a strong expectation of backward compatibility on every little bit of Hibernate, that makes it very difficult to evolve the software, and it means that over time you're going to accumulate quite a lot of cruft, right, and things that are not quite right. So I think really making clear, laying out and reorganizing things into well-defined, API, SPI, internal. These are things which are incubating. These are things which are deprecated. First of all, it gives our users fair warning, and it gives us the freedom to be able to continue to evolve the software in a sensible way without having to worry. Well, is this something that we're allowed to change, or is this a breaking change because we haven't given our users warning that this is an internal API.
And I mean that in general, that division between SPI and API is something that the Java language has been really terrible at, and it's been so easy to reach in and use unsupported things, and because the distinction hasn't been in the language, it can't go into the IDEs, which means users don't know that they're doing it. And I mean, we're getting a bit better, but as a language, we still have a ways to go on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, are you saying that everything changes and now all documentation has to be rewritten about Hibernate, or what's the?
So first of all, right? Like I'm talking a lot. I'm giving people fair warning that we're breaking stuff. Okay, every now and then it comes time to break stuff. Okay, but first of all, so that nobody's too scared. Everything written down in the JPA spec is written in the JPA spec. We have to continue complying with everything that's written in the JPA spec. Okay, so your code that's written against JPA APIs continues to work the same as it did before, at least. We have obviously attempted, and this is what I talked about being the real challenge. We have attempted to make sure that things we broke in a way that where migration is relatively easy. I think the only exception to that would be the removal of the old criteria API, where migration away from that, if people were still using that after all these years, is probably not going to be that easy. However, what I think is really important here is that a lot of the stuff is that things that go beyond JPA. A lot of the way we now want you to use Hibernate is different. Okay, which is not to say that your old code will necessarily break, but that we want you to take a different tack with a lot of things. And that means that all the answers on Stack Overflow are wrong. A lot of stuff in blogs is wrong. I mean, a lot of stuff in blogs was wrong already. Okay, a lot of answers on Stack Overflow were wrong already. The books are all completely outdated now. And so
ChatGPT will be wrong.
Yeah, everything ChatGPT tells you about how to use Hibernate is straight up wrong. Okay, at this point. So what are we going to do about that? While this is a question of how do we document this all these changes? How do we bring people up to speed with how to use Hibernate today? And I think there's two aspects of that, right? The first one is, for me as a developer, the most useful thing I can have is Java Doc. All right, Java Doc is wonderful. It's fantastic. It's something we do not use well enough, but it is fantastic. When I come to an API, I want to see somebody write a goddamn essay up the top of that interface, right? Telling me all about it, right? That is the most useful kind of documentation I could possibly have. Why? Because it's right there and I can click through to it, and I can read it while I'm writing code. So there has been a massive amount of work gone into the Java doc of the APIs and annotations and even more internal things, SPIs, and in Hibernate 6, and so that feature alone of Hibernate 6 to me changes like the user experience of using this product. Okay. Second of all, what do we do about our user guide? What do we do about our documentation? It's massive. It's out of date. And the only solution I came up with was to kind of, Steve and I kind of have, maybe a slightly different take on this, but my take was I need to write something new from scratch. And so I have written an introduction to Hibernate 6, which is about, I think, 84 pages long, and I don't want it to be any longer than that. And this is an opinionated guide to how we think you should use Hibernate. Okay, so it's probably going to have some opinions that not everybody's going to agree with in it, and that's okay. Secondly, there's a whole new guide on simply on the query language. The query language is now much more powerful, much more feature rich, and it's something which is I think probably never fully documented the way it should have been. I've made a great start on that, and that is now a similar kind of length to the introduction. Going forward, we're probably going to have to, and I think this is Steve's take on it, is that we're going to have to take some of the existing documentation that's there, kind of split it out into smaller documents and rewrite some of that stuff. But so
Can I jump in there real quick? I don't necessarily think that, but I think I've rethought on that a little bit. It's too easy for information to get duplicated, out of sync, and all that if you split it up. But no, I think reference documentation definitely is an important piece of this. And I wouldn't necessarily agree that the documentation is completely out of date, but clearly it's out of date in sections. Yeah. But I think writing a new guide and being able to point to a new to the reference section, hey, go here to see the full discussion of this topic, I think that's the gold standard. So.
Yeah. I saw there's a comment here saying, because I think one is like the how to do it, which I think is what you talk about, the opinionated how to use Hibernate. And then he's CPONC is saying that also how not to, but that's hard to do.
Yeah.
But,
yeah, so like I'm not sure this person's name, but excuse me. Yeah, so the way I write documentation these days, and the way I think most people have kind of settled down, is to write a lot of these admonitions, right? Tip and warning, and I think that's a great evolution in documentation technology, right? And and something we're very encouraged with ASCII doc to do a lot of that. And so that really so I love that, and there's a lot of that in the new docs of here's how you can use here's how you can solve a particular problem as a tip, or here's something I don't want you to do, right, as a warning or whatever.
Yeah. Again, just because you said this, like the documentation is wrong, a Stack Overflow is wrong. I'm just thinking, because if you take that literally, that sounds very like everything's wrong.
Scary.
Scary is one thing, but is it the fact that there's a lot of documentation that there's either, at least that's my feeling, either say, oh, Hibernate is hiding all the database, and therefore the answer will be, adding layers on top. And then there's docs that just don't understand that you should completely go, like there's the other group that says just skip Hibernate, skip ORMs and go more raw to the database. That's better. And is that what you're referring to?
This is this is the battle we fight, right? In my view, there is a hangover from early 90s object-oriented design patterns, kind of way of thinking about the world and thinking about software that I had thought by now would have gone out of fashion. particularly, it's so different to everything that that people who do data, data scientists or machine, the way they think about problems is so different to that. So I think really, I always the way I always conceived of this problem, and my view on this has hardened over the years, is that the data model sits at the center, right? And the data model is fundamentally, if I think about modeling data, my view, my way of thinking about data is much more a relational kind of a view. That's not to say it's a relational database view, but just a relational way of thinking about things. I mean, I'm a mathematician, and a relation is a function, more or less. If it has a primary key, it's a function. To me, that's at the center. And this data model has two realizations. It has a realization at the database as a schema with tables. It has a realization in your program. And if your program is written in Java, that's the best, to my view of how to model that data in your program is as a set of classes where each class represents an entity. Now, obviously, that's very different to the row mapper crowd, and maybe we could talk about that way of thinking about things in a sec. But fundamentally, these are two representations of one data model. I think it seems to me that the notion that there should be that the goal of object relational mapping, and somebody sent me on Twitter a couple of days ago, like this definition of a data mapper, which I think Hibernate is supposed to be a data mapper, the definition was it helps you decouple your relational data from your object model, right? I'm like, no, that's exactly backwards, right? That's not wrong. That's not arbitrarily wrong. That's not just wrong. It's like completely backwards. No, the purpose of object relational mapping is to couple these two things, these two representations together, because they represent the same thing. So, the other thing that hit me, I've been kind of, I've been thinking a bit about, architecture and how we, what we tell people to do, how we tell people to work with this in modern microservice kind of development, with this view of the world where the data model is kind of central to the representation of the data. And another thing that happened to me on Twitter recently was like somebody was tweeting about aggregates. I was like, what the hell is an aggregate? So I went and looked it up, right? And the definition was this. It was an aggregate is, something which kind of acts as a gateway to several bits, there's a parent of several children, persistent children, and access to this little subgraph or something of your data goes through the parent, right? And second of all, that's the first bit of it. And the second bit of it is that transactional boundaries are defined by the aggregate boundaries. So Max, you were around back then. What does it sound like to you?
Well, I think what I was referring to on a microservice level, but on a data model, I'm not.
I don't think further back. Think Java EE4.
This is a test, Max.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, this is horrible. I don't like this.
Entity beans, man. It's entity beans.
Oh, yes, that is true. Dude, I put that in a place I don't want to think about it.
Right. Look at it, right? Precisely, where you don't want to, and it even took me a couple of days to work out that that's what it was, right? Because I have entity beans in the same place. Like I thought we dispatched them 15 years ago. I thought when I joined the EJB group and convinced them to go with JPA and deprecate entity beans, I thought we'd done away with that.
Yeah.
But no, it's still live. It's just been rebranded as aggregates, right? No,
yeah.
I don't know. I'm sure some people could have a slightly different interpretation of an aggregate, but
So the way I understand aggregate, it does make sense on when let's say you go from a monolith, you want to go down and figure out where do I cut things, and then there's an aggregate. This user data fits together, product data fits together, but and then sometimes it makes sense, but where I think if you overdo it and put it into then it's going to be a problem, because then if you have that data is in the same database, if you follow aggregates, they'll be in different transactions, and then things goes weird.
Yeah.
So
It's interesting. When you gave that definition, I was immediately thinking DTO, but that's different from aggregate.
Yeah.
definition.
yeah, the access part, but not the transaction boundaries thing.
Hmm.
That's the one that makes it weird.
Well, I mean,
Well,
I
think
see
that-
where you're coming from, Steve. See, that would be a very charitable understanding of it, and I don't think it's the intended understanding.
I've never read.
You could, but if you want to interpret it that way, then maybe it's okay, and maybe my objections to the whole thing. See, that's the thing, right? That's the trouble with patterns, right? That's the other thing I was saying. Like they're so ambiguous. You know, if I can look at the same pattern and get entity beans, and you can look at the same pattern and get DTOs, I mean, these are entirely dissimilar concepts. And Max looks at it and gets a microservice, right? You know, I don't know, right? You know, what's the right interpretation here? Who knows? I don't, you know. So I don't know,
yeah. So you just go again.
Yeah. Anyway, I was, you know, to wrap up that, you know, I think, you know, a really important step we took was to say that entities, the things which represent our data, are these, you know, I hate using the word lightweight because it's such a meaningless word, but are these relatively small things. They're little things, right? They don't carry a lot of stuff with them. They don't have a lot of responsibility. They don't have responsibilities away from for doing anything that isn't just representing data and you know, maybe some basic kind of very well-defined, some very semantic business, as in business type semantic operations that they can do on their own, right? I think as soon as you start giving them other responsibilities beyond just being a thing that represents data, which is what making them an aggregate does, according to my interpretation, then I think you run into trouble. You get back into this early 90s notion of objects, where you start thinking about your system in terms of object interactions all the time, instead of you know, instead of thinking about the data as data, and putting that, you know, that as central.
Yeah.
And I think that leads to failure a lot of the time.
And how about the row mapper or the accessing stuff raw?
So
Why should we just do that? Yeah.
So I mean, you can do that, and it works, right? Like, you know, we all know that that systems which run a query, splash the results of that query on a screen, let you edit a row, systems like that work. You can build systems like that, and it's great for certain kinds of problems. My argument about this is the following: that as your system grows, the number of entities, the number of tables grows slowly. The number of queries grows much faster. So you're going to need, so if you're going to have a type safe, you're going to be type safe, which is important. If you're going to have a type safe representation of all these query result sets, okay, which is what you get with a row mapper, then you're going to have a lot of different, hundreds of different representations of your data. Now, what happens when something changes? You know, you don't have a central place where you can go to look to find the definition in your Java program. And maybe that's okay. It depends, you know, it depends. It's highly contextual, right? Me personally, if I'm building the kind of system where I have a lot of different queries all working against the same data model, then I want to have a nice, well-defined type-safe representation of my entities, okay? That's, to me, that's how I think about the world. You know, to me, the representation of my entities is like the most important. These are the most important representation of the real world out there, the business domain, right? That I have in my program. Most of the other stuff is like kind of, you know, I don't know, a bit technical. And so if you ask me to, you know, kind of smear that representation of my entities, of my data model out over all these different classes representing result sets, I feel like I've lost something. And I feel like I've lost maintainability is one of the things I've lost, right? And understandability, you know, wow, it's still understandable. I can still go to my database and find the real model, but it's been banished from my Java program.
Yeah,
Having
the other one I
built systems like that in the past. Oh, go ahead, Max. No, I'm just
go
saying,
ahead,
having built systems like that in the past, I used to work on a Delphi-based system, and yeah, we did exactly that. Just here's the query, it's embedded into your widget, and it pulls data back, and it's very difficult once things start changing. So yeah, I think Gavin hit it on the head.
Yeah, and the one I see people saying, "Hey, I don't want to use Hibernate because they feel it does too much magic and start fetching things we don't care about, like the lazy fetching, whatever." And this is why I've been a long-term fighter for the stateless session, right? Like, hey, I like session and loading stuff up, and I like the thing I remember doing the Hiberate training in the beginning. I didn't realize this until I did a Hiberate training. Like, oh wait, I load the reason why we have a session is I can load data up, get the same person in 3 or 4 different queries. I update the person, and then of course it only becomes one update. Whereas if I had hand coded, it might be 3 updates. But then if you go further, Hibernate can do more smarter batching and it understands more. And it actually is like gives a lot of performance at places. But then there's just cases where like I don't want to have to think about the magic. And Hibernate has this notion of stateless session that it got like years ago, but we never really pushed it, and it's not enough. Where you can have the same model, the same entities, do queries, and you just get it up and like, hey, these are really, really dumb naked objects, or and then you can control everything in a way that you want to. And that's what I see people use when they talk about, hey, we want to use Spring DWC or Uke, or there's this other product that's similar. That's the thing they go like, I want to be able to do that. And I don't think people realize that they can do both with Hibernate. And they've been able to do that for like 15 years or something.
Yeah, we messed up. I messed up. You messed up. You should have been louder.
Yeah.
We messed
So
up.
say
we should have put it into JPA 1, or we certainly should have put it into JPA 2. And that was an error that I think has caused people unnecessary heartache and has unnecessarily set people in the Java community against ORM. And we need to adapt to that. We messed up by not telling, telling people, shouting at people that this was an option they had. I shudder to think at the amount of cost to the economy that us not having a stateless session has had over 15 years.
Yeah, it's a big one. But you saying JPA spec, I saw I saw you proposed it as a part of the next JPA update. Is that moving?
Put me on the spot here, Max. I can't make any statement. I'm unable to make any statements at this time about how fast the JPA spec is moving. I've made lots of proposals.
It's been proposed. Yes. Okay.
It has been proposed, indeed.
Yeah. By the way, talk about specs and standards and behaviors and things that I saw Omar here. Where was his quiz? He says, "Could you talk about the reasoning behind making fetch type equal default?" I think this is yeah.
So the reasoning. So look, okay.
Oh, this was supposed to be easier than the JPA spec question.
So this is a story, and I don't know how much I can, So in the last dying days of the definition of JPA 1.0, where we were just trying to iron out the last remaining details of the annotations and the APIs, the question came up, and I wanted everything to be lazy, and the TopLink team had concerns about implementability of that and what that was going to mean in terms of to-one associations, because that was something they didn't support in their product. All right, and there was lots of horse trading going on, and I had gotten lots of things that I wanted, and that was one I let them have, and I have regretted it for 15 years because it was a mistake.
For those who might not get it, can you outline what it actually?
I'm sorry, I apologize. Right. So JPA says that too many associations are lazy by default, which is correct. We certainly don't want to go by default fetching too many association and by default. And it says that to one associations are non-lazy. That by default, if I request an entity, then I'll get its parent, right? And that's not terrible, maybe, because thing only has one parent, right? So it's at best case it's like one join to a single row. But even not being terrible, it's still wrong, and it still means that we fetch more data than you need. It means that JPA is harder to understand because the defaults aren't uniform, and it also means that the semantics of the query language differ to the semantics of the find method, and it's wrong. And so let's see if there's something we can do to let you change the default without us changing the default by default in the next rev JPA.
Is there actually, I forget, is there a way in having to say just flip the default?
No.
I thought that there was.
Yeah.
Maybe I didn't add it. Okay.
Yeah, no, you can. You have to mark. You have to mark the every. I mean, currently in Hibernate today, you have to, and this is what everybody should do. You have to go through and mark all your associations, your 2-1 associations. Fetch equals lazy.
Okay.
That's not great.
Okay. And I saw Christoph. He did hear me at least. He says he learns about state system in Quarkus episode. So yes, good. Someone listened.
Good job, Max.
We have a purpose.
No, it's been you had that discussion a long time ago. I saw. I'm trying to look. We have a list of things going through here. We had the docs. Did we talk about active records and panache?
Yeah, sure. We should talk about that. I don't know. I don't think you've got the 2 biggest advocates for panache on the line here. Is that correct, Steve? Okay. So I know what I'm about to say is probably going to you're surely going to piss off one of my closest colleagues and friends, which is Steph Ebersole. So what about panache? So I've been running a bit of a campaign against DAOs, right? Like I feel like DAOs are like repositories, whatever you want to call them, are something that's become overused. That their added value is questionable. Do we really need an abstraction over your abstraction? My argument, look, entity manager is a repository, right? You don't need this parallel class hierarchy in your program of, person DAO and person and, book DAO and book, like why? Now I have 2 data models, right? I have 2 objects representing every entity. And it's unnecessary. It's like, I remember, so then along came generics and rescued us from that hell. But for some reason, people entirely voluntarily keep doing it for entities. So I've been trying to kind of get, I don't want to turn into some sort of a jihad, DAOs are evil and bad and wrong. I mean, okay, it's a pattern you can use if you like. But I do want people to start questioning whether they're really getting much value out of that extra layer, and particularly in the case where these DAOs are provided by a separate framework, right? If you write your own DAOs in your own code, okay, good, fine, whatever. But when you have these frameworks which make your life easier by letting you write queries by encoding queries into the naming of your methods of your DAO, I think that's something which people need to start questioning, right? So what's the alternative, right? Well, the alternative, my preferred alternative, and I think probably Steve's as well, if he wants to tell me that's not his preferred alternative. My preferred alternative is say, actually, you don't need anything, right? Any manager is a repository. Queries generally aren't reusable between different transactions, right? It's okay to embed a query in whatever is the thing which which orchestrates your unit of work. That's okay, because you're probably not going to reuse that query across lots of different units of work. Or if you do, take that query and extract method or extract, constant.
Make it a named query. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know that people are getting much value out of DAOs, right? Okay. So Steph's answer to this question is different, right? Steph, has experience working with Play, I think it was, but the other people in the community have experience working with, Rails or whatever, and their preferred model is this thing called active record, where the entity class itself has the operations for doing persistence operations on it, and so that what's the right word? It gets around my objection to these parallel class hierarchies, right? And it's not crazy to think that a book might know how to save itself to the database. It's a problem if you plan on serializing these entity objects, but people tend not to do that anymore. And I think, and certainly in Quarkus, the way to externalize data is via JSON and all that stuff. So I think that's not an unreasonable way to go. Steph's created this, Panache solution, which is an implementation of Active Record for Hibernate and is available in Quarkus. And I think it's a very interesting project. And I really, we really want to see, am I personally is it what I would personally use? And I'm completely sold on it? Maybe not. But for people who who feel like they need something, right? I think that's a great alternative to DAOs. Okay, that's something you should consider as an alternative to DAOs. If you really feel like you want somewhere to put your queries, right? That's somewhere being in, something related to the entity itself. Then I think that's a super solution that's not DAOs and has its own, pluses and minuses, and people should consider using, consider that Active Record is a viable alternative to DAO.
And I remember when I saw Panache the first time, I was like, no. This is the reason was that the early days of Hibernate, I did a lot of take the JDBC and generate the Java code, the HPM to Java, and there was all these people who wanted to have all this base, have a base class with all the properties and then extend it, and I was like, it's just duplicate classes, not duplicate, the number just explodes, and then. I was like, no, Panache, I felt like, it's a Panache entity, you extend from it. But I realized, again, sitting down with Steph and have not a bottle, but a glass of whiskey, and he made a point first of all, Panache is done so you can pick which approach you want to take, right? So what I learned with Panache, I realized was, I can just have, because he uses the Quarkus build time you can just have you don't have to have a string, the field and a getter and setters. You just have the string name. That's it. And I didn't like it, but it's a lot less code to write. And the reason why I accepted it was I realized, most of the examples we do is actually just microservices. It's small services where you don't share the classes.
Right, exactly.
And that's which was what I did in the old, before, and now I don't need it. And the same thing with adding the methods. I don't like it, but I can definitely see that now it's not a problem as it was before. It's much more tolerable because people don't have to share their actual data jars. They just have to be listed, right?
So I feel like these people who like these aggregates, right, might might feel comfortable with Active Record, and maybe it's a nice, maybe because I'm old and I didn't grow up writing microservices. Maybe I don't get it because I'm old, right? So it might. I think maybe the truth of the matter is that it might be a really nice fit to that kind of Quarkus microservice model, like as you're saying. I think it might
Yeah,
it may be the case that this fits that use case.
Because I had a few conversations with people who go like, I don't like this thing, that like it should be a private field, it's protect, and I go like, why do you need to be private? Well, because I'll be sharing. That's a pattern we're following in Java.
Yeah.
And I go like, the only reason why we'll have it private is because you're sharing this somewhere outside this little thing, and when you don't do that, it's literally just extra characters for no good reason. And that's why I've learned to accept and see the value of what Panache is doing. But yeah, if I was gonna do more like sharing, I would probably do it the old way.
Yeah, right.
But it's for these stuff, it's fine. So yeah. No. Okay. I don't know where Holly disappeared. I don't.
Yeah, she dropped off.
Okay. We're on this hour. Don't know what I think we didn't talk about was like. SQL, criteria, magic method names.
Yeah, so we haven't talked about queries and type safety. I don't know if we want to talk about it now. Yeah. We want to leave it for another day. I don't know. Should we talk about that?
Well, let's finish off, and then people can ask questions if they want, and otherwise we'll take that as the last thing.
All right.
Yeah. So what's about it? Like you said, you did like magic method names, I think.
Oh right, okay, so right. So I like, I don't know, maybe. The thing which I have struggled with most over the years with respect to Hibernate is like the question of how do you make queries type safe, right? I love having this expressive language, which is HQL. I mean, it's essentially SQL, but in an object-oriented wrapping. I love having that very expressive language where I can express in a very short string things that are, really complicated, really quite, it's really powerful, right? But I really hate that it's a string that can't be, validated at compile time, right? So, what have always been the options? Well, criteria queries, right? But criteria queries in their initial form in Hibernate and at the time weren't much better in terms of type safety. References to entity attributes were passed as strings. Not much better. The verbosity was pretty bad. So there's a funny, in JPA 2. So I decided not, that wasn't going to be something I'd try to push in JPA 1. In JPA 2, they came back, and while I wasn't paying attention, they added a whole criteria API, which is a super complete model of JPQL, and it surprised me. It's like whoa, okay, this is you can do everything you can do in JPQL in this criteria API, and it was like, wow, that's pretty powerful. But then I just looked at it and I went, yeah, but it's no more type safe than JPQL, so what's the point, right? Everything's still passing names of attributes as strings, right? Like why, it's just more verbose. So I had this
well, you have content assist, right? That's what criteria API give you, content assist inherently. That's the one reason I see criteria API being nice, but that's about it.
Are you talking about the meta model? What do you mean by that?
Oh, right. So, I'm telling the story. No, don't skip to the end. I'm telling my story. Jesus.
Sorry.
So right. So I was looking at this API, and there was this new thing in Java called an annotation processor. So I had this brilliant.
You're all the way back there,
right?
Good.
Which is, hey, we could use this annotation processor to generate a meta model of the entities in our Java code, right? And then we can use these type safe references to these meta model objects to express our criteria queries. Now that meant, if we wanted to do this in a type safe way, that meant adding 1 or 2 or 3 type parameters to every class in this already ridiculously complicated criteria query API. And so what happened when for some reason I proposed this to the JPA2 group, and actually and actually decided to go with it. And so what came out of this was this ridiculously complicated criteria API with all this type safety and these, this annotation processor which generated all these references, and people looked at it and they were like, and they tried to write a code and you had all these types with like 2 type parameters and like nested type parameters and like they were like, well, what the hell is this? And it was like a complete failure. And I was like, okay, Java is not for me anymore. This is bad. I should not mess with Java anymore. It's. So a month ago, I came back, and after years of not looking at criteria query, and I installed like a recent version of Java. You know what happened in Java in these recently? Java now has var.
Yes.
And you know what? Criteria queries are actually pretty nice. So it only took like, I don't know, more than 10 years. but my brilliant / stupid idea actually, turned out not so bad after all. But is that the way I would write most queries? No, probably not. Okay. So what's the other option? So the other option, which is the one we talked about, I'm not sure if you were there, but certainly Emmanuel was there. Were you there? In Rome. Anyway. Which was to do some like absolute hack of an annotation processor and go and seek out your strings in your source code and validate them as HQL on an actual not the translation part of the compilation process, but the type check, the parsing and type checking part of the process of translating a HQL in an annotation from inside an annotation processor. So we're verging on Lombok levels of magic here, and indeed I had to steal some code Lombok recently to make that work. Fortunately, they have a compatible license.
Yeah, because you can't do that. You can't actually do the string stuff portably in a annotated processor, right?
No.
Sadly,
they gave us this thing which could have been so good if they just would have let us see the rest of the parse tree, but they don't. And it's very sad. And the things we could do in Java as framework library developers, if they would just let us see the rest of the parse tree, would be amazing. Unfortunately, we can't, so we have to go what's that word? Casting to internal compiler APIs, and so we've done that work for Java C, for ECJ, for Eclipse, and so I can actually do it, right? And it's a steaming pile of badness on top of badness, but it works.
But it sounds good.
So that's an alternative. That's an alternative way to solve this problem of types.
So that just to make it explicit, so the idea here is that users will write HQL, and then you'll have Hibernate or Quarkus Hibernate on the class bus, and that will have an annotation processor, and then it'll just print out if there's any errors found.
Right. And it even works from inside your IDE. In Eclipse, Eclipse actually has good support. Well, they'll actually let me display errors into the onto the parse tree, onto the AST itself, and they'll be displayed correctly in the IDE. In IntelliJ, unfortunately, that's not the case, but it does at least display the errors on a little pop-up console, and you can click through to the location in your code. So it actually works really nicely,
You can get it in. So I need to ask you, Steve, because as I hinted at this in the beginning, like Hibernate 6, as I said, it feels like the conclusion of the AST work you started back in, I don't know, 2004, whatever it was. Like, is it done now? Or because I know it was in the older days, it was all like a handmade string parsing stuff, and then we got Antler in to do the parsing of the query, and then I just remember you saying, "Hey, I have this branch of Hibernate that is doing almost everything via ASTs," and that feels like that's the thing that got merged in Hibernate 6. Is that?
That was one of the. That's the big underneath. We keep talking about the big changes that helped modernize Hibernate. Underneath the cover, that is the change, right? We've actually have multiple ASTs, but just the use of an AST gives you, when we're parsing things, when we're translating things, gives you a lot more power, right? For
guarantees,
checking, and all those kinds of things.
It also is a bit annoying because I had a few projects where suddenly Hibernate was complaining at me because I was doing stuff, and that was because I think it's like a function that accidentally was in the database, so therefore it worked. But Hibernate before Hibernate 6, it didn't care. But Hibernate 6, you go like, hey, I don't know this function. Please be specific. So
being able to have nodes for each individual part of the query, it definitely helps. With, Gavin was talking about the error reporting. We can be very specific about, hey, this violates something, or this may not be the right thing. Those kinds of things definitely help. And also too, I mean, being able to manipulate that as opposed to, a string buffer somewhere, and we're just, either, concatenating things together or truncating stuff off or rearranging the string, that kind of stuff. I mean, it's a typical benefit using the AST.
I can see all the fun stuff you can do. So, okay, guys, we are past hour, and I don't see more questions in the thing.
No, only somebody telling me criteria are awful, which is.
Yeah, but I think that was before you explained how good it is. But I think I also think the Hibernate criteria API hasn't been modernized as the JPA criteria API. So maybe that's what he's referring to.
That is gone in 6.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's gone. And the good criteria API you talk about is actually the JPA one that's been modernized and kept up to date, and with with war it becomes less verbose. But this is another thing. This is like an enterprise pattern stuff. Like there's people saying don't use war because then you can't see your type, and I'm like, no, dude.
What?
You use war? Yeah, because you can't see the type unless you have an IDE and stuff, right? But I'm like, don't just use war. Be happy. Type less and just
use var. It's good.
Yeah.
Var.
Var, var.
That thing, yeah.
Variable. Use variables. That's good.
Type inference is great.
Yeah.
Local type inference is great. Excuse me.
Oh, okay. Any last things, or we just close it here? What's Hibernate 7 coming? Oh, Hibernate. Yeah.
Yeah, we talked about it. Absolutely.
I think you better let Steve, catch some breath, man.
No,
I guess I should say, going back to a question you asked me, within the, if I can caveat that with, things that are incubating, I would say that, with 6.2, the AST work and a lot of that stuff's been finalized. But yeah, we have talked about Hibernate 7 and some things I want to do there.
All right. Well, let's save that for another one. And very good. Yeah. But thanks for you guys to be here. And I'll see you online. And bye-bye.
Cheers.
Right,
Thanks.